While the protests in Gaza are somewhat continuing, Hamas has decided to do what any dictatorship, what any authoritarian state, what any terrorist group does, and it's to crack down on those protests. Uh, uh, we'll go through some. We have one video that I want to play a bit later about what has been happening a few days ago. And today we are hearing reports about people actually getting killed for participating in those protests or for potentially even leading those protests. Yet what we don't hear is anybody speaking out against that. You would imagine that people who say there is a difference between Palestinians and Hamas, that when those Palestinians decide to stand up against that Hamas, that people would celebrate it, similar to when during Arab Spring, everybody pushed towards the protest. Yeah, this is all great. We should all support it. Yet we don't hear anything so far. So we'll talk about that also. But first, welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is Michael Kaufman. And Michael, to you, since you haven't been on in the last few days since the protests started happening in Gaza, what do you make of them?
Well, we should be very careful about what exactly they're protesting. But anti-Hamas, at first blush is good. It's a step in the right direction. We might just think back a little bit to a country called Syria, where there were similar protests against the regime to replace it with another so-called democratic or at least more lenient or open-minded regime. And I think it's pretty clear to everyone now that we simply changed one evil monster for another evil monster, maybe a bit more polished, maybe better on the PR front, the public relations front. But we should also be very clear that all of the students and other idiots, and I would call them evil idiots in the U.S. that are protesting in favor of these so-called freedom fighters, we need to define exactly what they mean by the freedom that they're fighting for. So this doesn't surprise me at all. When you have an education system that is based on death and hate and annihilation rather than on human flourishing, this is what you get. And you're going from one bad thing to another, in my opinion.
Yeah, now we'll have to see where these protests go. But as we mentioned before, that the only time I'll accept that the Palestinians really do want something different rather than different kind of terrorism is when one will see some hostages getting released, being forced to release basically by Palestinians when they give up. I mean, again, just go back. There is a. I'm not sure if that offer still applies, but originally there was offer of 5 million for and a safe passage out of Gaza for anybody giving any information that would lead to the release or the rescue of hostages. And then nobody from the Palestinians took them up on that offer. Now, if they are truly standing up to Hamas, this is a great chance to do really something about that. Uh, but let's go watch just one quick video about what Hamas has been doing. So this was from a few days ago, basically when some of the protests were happening. Hamas has basically came in. They didn't shoot into the crowd, or at least yet, but basically we're just shooting in the air, letting them know we are here. Don't do this. Yeah, basically intimidating them. I mean, so they do not stand up, so they do not speak out. Uh, yeah, Michael, is this an action of oppressed people, trying to stand up to some foreign power that is occupying them?
No, this is the action of a uh, evil, military dictatorship that is hiding behind Islam, but not hiding behind militant Islam, because this is completely consistent with you either believe what I believe or I kill you. And you gotta realize, folks, that these are not the people who, whenever they achieve the people with the guns, whenever they achieve their aims, they're going to sit down and set up a democracy. I mean, this is what's so appalling to me. This is so far from anything that's acceptable in any kind of Western or modern society that it's actually shameful that anyone in the West or believing Western values could think that there's any similarity or any path from what you see here to anything. And the second thing I'll point out, for all the women that are protesting around the world that are pro-Palestinian, show me how many women are out there on either side. And it's something, it's a convenient thing to forget. But I look at this and I think, how stupid can you be to believe that anything positive is going to come out of Hamas? These people need to be annihilated. And hopefully the people that are protesting could be re-educated. And I don't mean that in the kind of put them into Soviet re-education camps. I mean, they need to be re-educated that there is a different path that exists in the world, and that path is based on life and liberty, and let people achieve what they can achieve and not mess with other people. Uh, this is not anything that will ever lead anywhere except the death of those protesters, which is what I think we're hearing about now.
Somebody in the chat says Daniel looks skinny on that shirt. Well, I'm actually at my lowest weight since I started losing weight, so maybe that's what you're looking. But yeah, also black makes it much easier to sort of yeah, black is slimming, I think that's the word.
Well, that's definitely a super chat. I don't know if it's a super chat, but it's definitely a super chat.
Thank you so much. But going further into, so first, this is not the first time, of course, Hamas is cracking down on any sort of opposition. Hamas came into existence by immediately cracking down on Fatah and all basically Palestinian Authority related things in Gaza so they could completely take over. Um, now, as I said, one person who is specifically mentioned in the reports is Oday al-Rubai, who's a 22-year-old resident of Gaza City's Tel Al-Hava neighborhood. And he basically was part of those public demonstrations and spoke out against Hamas on social media as well. He was abducted by Hamas operatives, tortured for 4 hours, and then returned to his family, basically thrown in front of their house, dead, basically completely killed. Now, as I've said, Hamas has done that in the past and we've covered pretty much every single time somebody in Gaza did speak out, and the story always was someone alone spoke out, basically usually one person in the crowd, and usually ended up dead very soon after. And even in this scenario, many people who are speaking out against what happened to this person do not give their names, are afraid of what Hamas is going to do. Somebody said he was dragged by a rope around his neck, beaten with clubs and metal rods in front of a passerby. And I think this is a different person. There's several people who have been basically killed by Hamas. This is what Hamas is doing, and I Eitan Fischberger sort of wrote a list about the people who should speak out against this. So I checked all of their exes. So Amnesty International, UN, UNRWA, Francesca. There is also Dropsite, which is sort of independent Gaza media. Nobody's talking about this. I think Dropsite and Amnesty and UNRWA have actually posted things in the last few hours. Specifically, Dropsite actually posted about how Israel has recently killed some Palestinians in Gaza. So again, Israel defending itself by conducting operations in Gaza. We have to speak about that. But Hamas killing their own civilians, their own people, because they speak out against the regime, not because they are aligning themselves with Israel, not because they are, in any sort of way being operatives for Israel. No, just because they speak out against the government of Gaza. That's what gets them killed. And Michael, what do you think it is? I'm trying to ask myself if there is, we have our, reservations about the protests and how meaningful they are. But if you are any sort of, pro-Palestinian, as people claim, and they make sure to say, we are not pro-Hamas, we are pro-Palestinian. We just want Palestinians to have a state. We just want Palestinians to live free of aggression. But now Hamas is cracking down on those Palestinians. Why is nobody speaking out?
Well, this is not anything new. From growing up in the time when South Africa was clearly apartheid and the white people controlled the black people, and eventually, due to good people like Nelson Mandela and others, and when the UN was sometimes on the right side of history, we got rid of apartheid. Guess what happened, folks? We replaced the white oppressors with the black oppressors. And you all know, I think, that South Africa is one of the most illegitimate and despicable states around, to the point where the U.S. has thrown out the ambassador. They are absolutely not standing for anything good in the world, and they are oppressing their own people, mostly black. They're stealing land, the government. It is a disaster. And you'll all note that there are no UN resolutions against South Africa, and there's no equivalent of Nelson Mandela that has risen up and said, this is bad. And there's a very, very simple explanation, because the elite and the so-called educated have always thought that it was perfectly legitimate, or at least not worthy of comment, for people to kill their own people. And as long as their skin color was the same, you can do whatever you want. And if you don't believe me, go read about South Africa. But more importantly, go read about the ongoing wars in Africa, including Sudan. Just go read it. You don't need to look more than 10 or 15 countries, because you can find good examples of black people, mainly different tribes, killing each other throughout Africa. And we're talking about tens and thousands, hundreds of thousands, in some case, Sudan, a million or more people that are dead. But it's all color versus color, and it's oppressor versus the same color oppressed. And this is all perfectly fine. It's not part of critical race theory. It's not part of the current DEI baloney that's going around the world. And that is fine. So the answer is, people are hypocrites. I think what a real hypocrite is called a liar. The desire that 2 + 2 can equal whatever I want it to equal is part of this whole thing. And this notion that the word freedom ever enters into any discussion with Hamas or the people it oppresses is absurd. It's absurd. And by the way, I want to know which countries in the Muslim world are actually free by any standard that our so-called educated elite, including on the great networks in America, MSNBC, CNN, and so forth. I want to know which countries in the Muslim world are free. And it starts from there. And that's why it's so profoundly ridiculous. And this seems to be the plan today, is that the more obvious something is, the more we want to choose the opposite. Truly doublespeak. It's right out of Orwell's doublespeak. It is truly up is down, black is white, good is evil, et cetera, et cetera. And it has to change, or we're just going to have lots more dead people. And frankly, I think it's time for those of us who are more civilized about it and thoughtful about it to stop pretending, for example, that these people protesting in favor of Hamas are actually just useful idiots. They're not. They're dangerous idiots. They should never be employed by any reasonable company, because what are they going to do when you tell them no? and they should be expelled to the extent that they are not citizens. They should be expelled out of any country that truly is freedom loving. And that's what I make of it. I make of it that this has been going on for a long time, and now it has finally bubbled to the absolute surface.
We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And a super chat from Paul Zeus. Thank you so much. And yeah, sort of to build upon what you said, it definitely, any free society requires sort of constant vigilance, basically making sure that the ideas that do make the Western civilization possible are the dominant ideas. And the fact is that, yeah, when you look at the universities, you really have these like straight up pro-Hamas people, even the people who say they are pro-Palestinian. When you really go into it, and I mean, even when you take the actions they are themselves taking, breaking the law to get some demands from the colleges or from the universities, and those universities back down. In many cases, they basically said, "Yeah, you guys have taken over a building, so now we'll give you something for it. We'll reward you." And yeah, when you have it's the exact same tactic that Hamas and the Palestinians have done. When they commit violence, that's when they get rewarded. And it's the same with the students. When they commit violence, and again, taking over property is violence. It's you are breaking a law or you are breaking some rule. This is not just because nobody was beaten up in the process or possibly no property was damaged in the process. Doesn't mean it's not violence. You are still occupying something you shouldn't have access to. You should not be at. And the fact is that we in the West have sort of stopped enforcing our own standards, enforcing our own rules. Universities do not enforce their rules. We have sort of these protests clogging up the streets, clogging up buildings, and oftentimes they are not punished. And when that happens, then yeah, there is nobody will care about what the law says. Nobody will care about what the right thing is. It's just what we feel like. Well, we feel like, the Palestinians have been wronged. So this should be corrected in some way. Michael?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's look, half the problem is that we adults, and by adults I mean freedom loving, tax paying, hardworking, like-minded people who are raising families and want to be able to walk around outside and not have our kids killed or shot or threatened, are not interested in being run over by armed thugs who think that dressing up and looking scary, and by the way, they're not. An American could come in, an American flight or an Israeli airplane could come in and blow these people to smithereens, as they have. And this kind of old school, aren't we impressive, wrapped up scary people. Yeah, they're scary on the ground when you're facing a gun, but it's a lot scarier when you're looking up and there's an F-35 where you can't see it because it's too fast, or you hear the whistle of the missile that's coming in to destroy you. I mean, we need to stop putting up with this. I do think there's way too much leniency. The world was heading in a wrong direction, and certainly Barack Obama, in my strong opinion, helped us get to this moral relativism. I mean, relativism has been around for a long time, but Obama really codified it, and he also codified leading from behind. And what this all leads to, and it's like Ayn Rand said, philosophy underpins action and culture. And this is exactly where this kind of philosophy of all philosophies are equal. There's liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness on one side. And pretty much on the other side is anti-life, anti-liberty, anti-happiness on the other, except that happiness is for a few, of course, if they're not killed by their leader, and so on. And you have those two places to be. And it is remarkable to me that good people, good again being the taxpayers, the people that actually love life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, have allowed the universities to teach this crap, have allowed these protests to go on. We had George Floyd, everybody had to cover during COVID except the George Floyd protesters. It was a horrendous thing what happened to him, but it was the same crap. We're going to destroy buildings in the name of a very bad outcome on a criminal, but on an absolutely inappropriate outcome on a criminal. And the answer is to destroy everything. And that is exactly what terrorism is all about. The problem with terrorism, it can only feed, it's like a fire. You have to keep feeding it. And we are the good people that keep feeding these idiots and these dangerous folks. We keep feeding them because if we didn't keep sending our kids to these schools and our alumni didn't keep donating to these schools, and if we didn't continue to listen to so-called congressional hearings, which obviously show the corruption in these formerly elite universities, and pretend that this is okay, now we had a meeting about it. Nothing happened after that. Nothing. One or two people resigned. Guess what? One other one just resigned. The interim just from Columbia just resigned again. You know why she resigned? Because after she came in to do something useful about the people who support Hamas, she didn't do anything, which was the goal. And I'm sure the board of directors say just maintaining the status quo, the board of overseers, whatever. And this we know we are smart people. Many of us run businesses. Our job is to see through all the smoke screens and the crap. And this is what we've allowed. So we need to stop putting up with it and pretending that views that are contrary to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are acceptable. They are not. When they become acceptable, you end up with exactly what we have here.
Some people in the chat are discussing if the protesters are nihilists, and so sort of, if you go by the what usually is understood by nihilism is basically rejection of any values. Wanting, it's basically this idea that you see something good, you see something valuable, and you want to destroy it. You do not want society to prosper. You do not want any values to sort of be attainable. And yeah, when you, for example, with the George Floyd protests, uh, uh, now not obviously not all of them were violent, but yeah, once you get to the point where they just start like torching down random buildings, like destroying buildings on the streets, that is almost pretty much pure nihilism. That is pretty much, you just want the society to burn down. You have this feeling of injustice, they would call it, and you think everybody should suffer because of it. Not, you shouldn't go after specific people or change specific things. It's, just burning down. Because again, well, the completely different topic, but if you wanna, have a solution for the, police brutality, or what they perceive as police brutality, well, what will make it better? Better police training, maybe body cameras, and what did they call for? Defund police. Well, do you think the police would be maybe even worse when it gets defunded? So that is clearly the sort of like, you just want things to burn down. You do not care for any solutions. And
Yeah, I just want to add to
yeah.
that because I think it's super important. They defunded the police. This has been done before. It led to the same problem before, which was crime went way up. And guess where crime went up? In exactly the neighborhoods that you pretended to protect. It is unacceptable. It would really be like treating an infection by taking leeches and putting them on people. We know that doesn't work. We would be sued if we ever treated an infection for doing that. And yet, somehow, in these so called enlightened sociological experiments, we are allowed to repeat complete disasters. And crime rates have gone up. And guess what? There's a huge problem now in Seattle, Washington, which is one of the great places to support defund the police. Guess what? There's a big fight going on to refund the police. Not only refund it, but to admit that the defund the police movement was a disaster. Now, I don't want to thank those people for getting it right because I don't know how many dead people were between them making a stupid decision before and now admitting that this was not only stupid, but it actually was fatal for some people. And this is what I mean about those of us that are adults and thoughtful and rational who support West need to stop putting up with this. It really means we have to vote for politicians who are supposed to represent us, who actually have some brains in their head and some connection to reality, which is not something that the people running defund the police or the far progressive left have.
And sort of just bringing it back to Palestinians and people who support the so-called Palestinian state, I think it's very similar to nihilism because the people who call for Palestinian state, or we talked about African nations, the people who called for decolonization, or people who called for independence of the states in the Middle East, or everywhere across the world, there were no standards for it. There were no calls for liberal democracies that will be align themselves with the West. No, it was just burn it down. No, no, no. The West just has to get out. Nothing else matters. The West just has to get out, and that's what's happening. In Israel, similar. No, no, no. The Israelis from the West Bank have to get out. Yes, if Palestinians want to kill each other and want to kill Jews and want to just have the GDP of like 1/50th of Israel, then yeah, they can do whatever they want. But if Israel wants to have property rights, establish property rights, establish rule of law in those territories, that's evil. But living like nomads, living like basically savages, that's okay as long as it's their choice, as long as it's sort of something they want to do. And that's exactly what you see. And that's, I think, is the exact reason why people are not speaking out against these pro-Palestinians, against Hamas, because Hamas is fighting Israel. And getting Israel out of those territories is the most important thing for them. It doesn't matter if Palestinians could live side by side with Israelis and have full rights, they would rather burn them down. They would rather have a Palestinian state than have them live peacefully. Because we have like Arabs in Israel and Arabs in Gaza and West Bank were the same kind of Arabs just few decades ago. It wasn't like that, like magically they are some sort of a different group that they cannot coexist together. It is the ideology that changed them.
Yeah, one
Michael?
last
Yeah.
comment before we have to close. Again, I think everybody who's listening to this generally would be similarly minded, probably. But when you come up against people, don't let them dig into some minor detail that's not relevant to the foundational discussion. The discussion we're really having is what is the future of civilization? And I'm not trying to use big words just to scare people or to impress you. We are talking about the future of civilization. Netanyahu said it, and I don't like him much at all, especially less every day. But he did say very nicely to the UN, I believe it was. He said, "This is not a battle between civilizations. This is a battle between civilization and barbarity and barbarism." And we need to stop pretending that there are nice terrorists. We need to stop pretending that this moron who probably has a second or third grade education holding up a machine gun or a submachine gun there with his face wrapped up in military gear has anything positive to add to the world. He does not. And frankly, he has forfeited, in my strong opinion, he has forfeited his right to live by doing what he is doing because he has used lethal force against people who do not deserve lethal force, both his own people as well as, no doubt, Israelis. So please, folks, don't let the sort of idiots on the left, especially the dangerous idiots, co-opt you into some ridiculous discussion that has no importance in terms of the future of the situation. The situation is we need to crack down completely and stop tolerating this crap. Because if you start to let civilization become a discussion, you will get that. You will get a dissolved civilization.
And with that, we'll continue covering this, of course, coming back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective as well as the reality show. Thank you, Michael, for joining me
Thank you.
today. Thank you,
Have a good
everybody,
one.
for watching, and
Cheers.
bye bye.
Bye bye.